this is a drum I've been banging for a while, is that your technology should be in place to remove friction from the guest experience so that you can focus your energy and your resources on serving the guest even better. So it's not necessarily all about just automation so that there's no human interaction. We're in a human business, right? So people want to have that interaction with another person. But at the same time, we are at a point where we've accepted a lot of friction for far too long, that this is just the normal standard. And that now if we can actually look at it and say, well, this is actually slowing our business down, which then makes our guests jump through more hoops, and it puts more of an effort on our team members or on management and leadership that can better be allocated somewhere else, whether it is focused on growing your business or if it's drinking margaritas on the beach.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. Welcome back to another episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. And we're taking it round two. This is a second attempt for us trying to record. So hopefully we'll get this one down today. But Josh, welcome to the show, my friend. And I'm excited to jump into your background with attractions and theme parks and all the other stuff that go into another side of hospitality. So if you want to give us a quick intro on you and what you've been doing and how you got into the industry, I would love to hear more.
Absolutely, Will. Really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me on. I've been in the hospitality, tourism, and attractions industry for about 17 years. So I've been in the business since 2005. A lot of my experience very much is on the attraction side. So that includes theme parks, amusement parks, cultural attractions like zoos, museums, aquariums. So probably a different area of hospitality than most people are used to talking about from the typical hotels, resorts, et cetera, restaurants, things like that. But a lot of the focus that I've been doing the last several years has been very much the hospitality side of the business. So I've worked for Disney, I've worked for Universal, I've opened a number of theme parks, amusement parks, and attractions, and consulted for the industry as well as for hotels and resorts too. Shortly after getting out of grad school, got my master's in hospitality and tourism. I was consulting for brands like Ritz-Carlton and Four Seasons and Waldorf Astoria and Mandarin Oriental, and probably a lot of ones that you're familiar with, and was able to actually take a lot of what's being done in the luxury and premium hotel and resort space and be able to infuse a lot of that into places like zoos and aquariums and museums and amusement parks and things like that. So a lot of the consulting that I've done over the years is very much in the realm of guest experience. And the operational part of guest experience is very much driven by hospitality. So that's a lot of what I like to talk about in terms of driving loyalty and resolving complaints and exceeding expectations, going above and beyond, just creating wow moments and memorable experiences. Most recently, I was appointed the role of guest experience evangelist by Roller Software, which is a tech company based in Australia, focusing on ticketing and point of sale for attractions of various scopes. And a lot of what's being done at Roller is really talking about removing friction from many areas of the guest experience. And when you remove friction, it makes it much more convenient, and that convenience leads to loyalty. So that's a lot of what I love talking about removing friction, making things more convenient for your guests, and then being able to infuse your hospitality standard into it and take all of that and drive loyalty and advocacy to your brand.
I love that so much. I put a star by on my notes that convenience leads to loyalty, because I'm a big fan of convenience. My roommates or friends will probably make fun of me because I always say like, hey, if it's not convenient, I don't want to do it. Like it needs to make sense. And I don't like to waste time. I don't like to, wait around too long. Selfishly, I think the Amazon Prime now, like we're so used to like, hey, if we order something, we get it the next day, even same day if we wanted, and kind of joke about that. But I would love to kind of get your thought and opinion, because I look at attractions and theme parks and, stuff like Disney and Universal as kind of like daytime hospitality, right? Because a lot of people you can't stay at the park overnight. You can stay at a hotel near the park overnight. But this is a very different type of hospitality, especially because it's a lot about like, hey, trying to get through as many people as possible for this one particular ride, attraction. Maybe it's a cool Star Wars character that's trying to take a bunch of pictures with everybody. So what's it kind of like for you on the hospitality? How do you bring hospitality to something that could be so numbers based, so time, like, hey, let's just get everyone through type of structure? What's that like for you when you go into a kind of a company like that?
That's an awesome question, and that kind of brings me back to when I used to work for Universal and for Disney, that particularly around the holiday season, the busiest week of the year is right between Christmas and New Year's. And those are the days where like the parks are hitting capacity. So it very much is that numbers game. Like you just said, we got to get people through, but we got to deliver an amazing experience with it as well. And I remember seeing what some of the biggest complaints that guests had during those times of years. And yeah, they would complain about crowds and complain about this and that. But then they would say the amount of times I saw the phrase herded like cattle, it was unbelievable. They felt like they were being herded like cattle through a queue, which means that they're actually kind of complaining about how efficient we're trying to be to get them to the front of the line so that they're not waiting as long. And ultimately, when you focus on that efficiency, but without the personalization and without the experiential elements of it, then it kind of makes the guest more of a transaction rather than an actual guest. And it becomes about throughput and becomes about numbers. Now, it's extremely important to be able to do that and focus that efficiency and make sure you're getting your guests through, as quickly and, as safely as possible, given the circumstance, given the level of crowds. But at the same time, you can't lose sight of the fact that they are here, that they want to have fun while they're doing it, and being able to add in a personal touch, or at least to acknowledge to them that they're waiting in line, or make that wait time less of a burden, less frustrating. What is it that we can do to actually make that time meaningful for them while they're waiting for that part of an experience? So a number of I would say diving off points that obviously we can go to from there. But as far as saying, hey, here's the line, here's the efficiency, the end of the road is this amazing attraction or this ride or this roller coaster or whatever it is. How are we making sure that the time is being well spent just to get up to that point of the experience?
I was going to ask you, that's kind of my leading question, is how do you individualize something like that with such a big number of people? Like it is a numbers game, but it also, like you just said, there is a point where you kind of need to make it less transactional. So do you have any examples? I would be curious, like immediately in my head, I would think of, okay, a line is super long, but it's a super popular ride, right? Like how do you make that more enjoyable? Well, you get some staff out there, you create some entertainment, maybe some free snacks or drinks. I don't know what that looks like, but that's kind of what pops in my head. Is there anything in particular that you thought was really cool or special from your time doing that, making that kind of painful experience of line waiting to not be as painful?
You can do all of those things. When I worked at Cedar Point, they had DJs in many of the queues.
Okay.
And you could request
like
a song. That. The DJ would be up there. He'd be engaging the audience to try to create a little bit of I guess, somewhat of a party atmosphere, or at least just a high energy, because waiting in line and going through the switchbacks and just going back and forth. Yeah, it feels like being herded like cattle. Like those guests aren't wrong for feeling that way. But a lot of what I talk about too is, creating a personalized experience for your guests. And this very much is where the hospitality component comes in. And when you look at the idea of creating a personalized experience, it's very much an accordion style process. If it's
100%.
very slow, if there's no one around, and you've got the opportunity to strike up a conversation with that guest, then you can have these questions preloaded. Where are you visiting from? How long are you in town? Are you enjoying your stay here? Is it your first time here? What are you looking forward to doing today? Any and all of that. You're able to weave that into your interactions with guests and being able to have those conversations as much as possible. The guest ultimately has their expectations exceeded because it goes beyond the functional mechanics of the job duty. So it goes a little bit above and beyond. It's not, it's not the most monumental thing in the entire world, but it doesn't need to be. It needs to be higher than average, but consistently. And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, if it's that, that week between Christmas and New Year's and it's extremely busy, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to have those deep of conversations with guests, but you can look at the quick elements, kind of the quick hit conversation pieces that you can have with guests that don't disrupt the efficiency, but at the same time create a little bit of a personal approach. So how often do you see people walking around, whether it's in hotels, whether it's at theme parks, whether it's out of the street, whatever it is, and they're wearing hats and T-shirts with, could be their university or their favorite sports team logo or a movie or a band or whatever it is. So often people are wearing conversation starters. So if you see someone wearing, a Red Sox hat, it could be like, oh, are you, coming from Boston? What's the weather like back home? And then you move on. And then it's a little bit of that personal touch. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, a logo or kind of, some intellectual property or, familiar environment. It could be, hey, I really like that hat. I really like that sweater, whatever it is, that enables you to at least seek a commonality with the guest. And it doesn't matter if you're even familiar with that product or not. When I would do training workshops, I would joke and say, hey, if you're a fan of, their rival team, that can create some friendly conversation. And I've heard instances where it's created not friendly conversations. So you got to obviously watch out for that. But it can be those quick moments to show the guest that, yes, you're focused on the efficiency and the safety of the operation and everything that's going on. But at the same time, you value their individuality as the guest who came to visit as well.
I love that. And a really good example is, when we first met actually, or started talking when I was in Cancun, my flight home, I was wearing this white kind of like waffle, like hoodie. And it was just, I travel comfortably. I don't travel for style or fashion. I just travel comfortable. And the amount of compliments from TSA members, airline members, just like, oh, I love that hoodie. It's like, oh, like that's a really nice thing to go out of the way. And I think, I'm not a big sports fan. I don't, follow sports teams. I'm not into NFL. I'm not like I'm not going to watch the game every Sunday. So for me, trying to relate with people with sports is hard, but you can always at least bring up like, hey, like, you can always bring up a simple question that doesn't have to reference the actual team. Like, sports or know the team. You can always reference, like, hey, is there a game coming up soon? Have you been to a live game? Just asking questions about stuff. Because maybe they got that hoodie or that hat or that T-shirt at the game, and it sparks a really good memory because they were able to bring their 7-year-old daughter or whatever that may be to the game. So yeah, you could find, like, I love that what you said. People are wearing conversation starters. Now that's like such a great point. I think attention to detail, and you kind of reference it to, pay attention to body language and tone of voice and all that other stuff, because maybe you can mention a rival team and they may not be so happy with it. So you could just kind of pick up on those cues. But I want to ask you kind of a question now, because obviously, and I'm not going to try to say it, but over the last 2 years, we've kind of experienced a lot less human interaction. Is there a way, or maybe do you know of creative ways that people can keep that individuality, hospitality type feel with such a virtual heavy, I guess, engagement with guests now? With COVID was obviously a big thing, but I feel like we're not experiencing as much in person. So is there a way to still keep that type of hospitality engaged with your guests, or we're not seeing them in person as much?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the principles of a personalized experience and many of those hospitality elements, I think really can transcend uh, the application or whatever type of interface it is, whether it's in person, whether it's on the phone, whether it's via email or through some sort of text chat, to be able to say, well, what can I do to make this person feel like the only one, even if it's just in that moment. And so many small things. Using their name is so important, and we know that that's one of the biggest hospitality principles, particularly as you go up to the luxury brands and you're checking in. How many times is the front desk agent using your name in real life? So I think something like that very easily can be transferred over into the digital world. And I think that it might even be easier to do that in some cases. I don't have to remember that your name is Will. It's right there on my screen right there. So I've got that quick identifier. Obviously I remember anyway, but just that quick reminder and that ability to say, all right, I can use this person's name throughout conversation and create a personalized experience that makes them feel like an individual in this moment in whatever setting it is, whether it's in reality or whether it's virtual.
And I think, and I want to get your take on this too, a big, I don't know, passion concept I've had with hospitality in this last, couple months is balanced hospitality. I think a lot of people are really focusing on automation to the extreme, especially coming from the short-term rental or the vacation rental world. Where people are like, you can automate everything so you can be on the beach laying and drinking margaritas all day and not have to do a single thing. It's like, whoa, like, how do you know what's actually going on in your business then if you have it that automated, right? And how does the guest feel, right? Do they get that kind of herded like cattle feel when it comes to asking a specific question, maybe that you didn't have an automation response for, and then they get an automation response that doesn't really relate to what they just asked you, and now they're feeling like there's a missing link, right? So the question really I have for you is there a way that, this type of hospitality, whether it's theme parks, hotels, airlines, you name it, anything under the spectrum of travel, how do we increase that high tech, high touch feel where it's not automated to the point where we're kind of losing touch of what's actually happening in our business, but we're also not doing the tedious tasks that, like, I'm sure that you're experiencing with Roller, that they're solving a lot of the tedious, mundane things that the team doesn't really need to be doing. Software should really be taken care of, so that way they can go focus on those personalized experiences with guests on the theme park or in line in the queue, whatever it may be. Is there like a certain, I don't know, opinion that you have on that? What have you seen kind of when it comes to balanced hospitality, as I like to call it?
This is a drum I've been banging for a while, is that your technology should be in place to remove friction from the guest experience so that you can focus your energy and your resources on serving the guest even better. So it's not necessarily all about just automation so that there's no human interaction. We're in a human business, right? So people want to have that interaction with another person. But at the same time, we are at a point where we've accepted a lot of friction for far too long, that this is just the normal standard. And that now if we can actually look at it and say, well, this is actually slowing our business down, which then makes our guests jump through more hoops, and it puts more of an effort on our team members or on management and leadership that can better be allocated somewhere else, whether it is focused on growing your business or if it's drinking margaritas on the beach, right? But hopefully it's towards growing your business, that we can implement a lot of technology to be able to remove much of the administrative work. And that, I think, is a big thing to be focusing on, because your guests want an easy experience. You mentioned Amazon Prime at the beginning of the interview. And if you look at Amazon, you look at Netflix and Uber and DoorDash, you probably don't think of yourself as competing with these businesses, But if you look at the ways that they've removed friction from their experience for their guests or customers, it has reset the expectation across the board. So people are now comparing you to their last great experience, regardless of what industry they was in. So yeah, if you can go on Amazon Prime and you can order a package and have it be delivered next day or even same day, well, that now changes my feeling of when I book a hotel room or when I check into a hotel room. What is that instant gratification that my brain has been rewired to work? So kind of tying this in with your question as far as sort of the automation component of it and the efficiency and the balance with the guest experience, what can you do to remove hurdles from the guest experience that allow you to position your staff to better serve the guests? And I'll give you one quick example, and it's something we're seeing pretty big in the attractions industry right now, is buying tickets. So much of it is online. Majority of places are selling tickets online, and a huge percentage of guests are buying online. But for those guests who arrive on site and they want to purchase at the point of sale on site, you've got the traditional, queue up to the, ticket window or ticket counter or whatever it is. And it's often a one-to-one interaction. And that's been the traditional model for however many decades. But by implementing a self-service kiosk, well, now you give the guest the agency over their transaction. So similar, there's self-check-in in hotels. So the human element is not needed for the functional component of the transaction. But instead of eliminating your staff altogether, now instead of having a 1-to-1 ratio of staff member and cash register, maybe you have a 1-to-3 ratio or 1-to-4 ratio with staff member and kiosk. And now that person can actually be floating a little bit more, and they can jump in, they can help you, they can offer assistance, they can answer questions for you, they can help guide you through the process, they can tell you what's available, they can get you excited about it. And the only thing they're not doing is swiping your credit card because they don't need to, right? That's already able to be done. So that's part of the balance there of saying, you don't want to eliminate the human component altogether. People want that human to human experience, but there are many things that it's no longer needed for. And, buying tickets or transacting, at least the functional mechanics of it, is something that, that we could put more agency into the hands of the guests for.
Totally agree. And you kind of brought up a memory or just something that just kind of sparked not an idea, but I've talked about this in the past, like that Verizon wireless experience, right? When you walk into a Verizon store, you're not waiting in line at a front desk to get helped. You walk in and someone literally walks up to you with an iPad and is ready to take care of you based off of either your current account that you have with them. They can pull up with the last four of your number, or just saying, hey, I want to get the new iPhone, or I want to get the new Samsung, whatever the device may be, or you're looking for different charging cables. I don't know. But you have that experience, right? You walk in and it's already like, you don't have to wait in this line, and you have that free float comfortability where you can also relate with that person. There's no barrier. I'm a front desk guy. I started with the front desk with Marriott. So you don't have that barrier between you and the guest now. And a company that kind of sparks to mind also is Muse in the hotel hospitality travel industry, is that they've created a property management software that is like a CRM, where you're not just selling a room, you're selling space. So whether it's a co-working space inside your hotel, whether it's a day use room, whether it's a hostel and you're selling a bunk bed instead of a room, whatever it may be, they have that ability where they've changed the software to remember the person, not the overall just transaction, right? So you're able to be, when I was a front office manager, the only way our repeat guest really had that repeat guest experience was basically if I was on site, right? Like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, welcome back to the hotel. So good to see you again. But if I wasn't there, they didn't get that experience. And you said earlier in the interview is higher than average service, but consistently. So how do you keep that consistency when your staff member that's on site has a day off and that guest doesn't get that same experience? So I think technology can really help with that consistency aspect that you're talking about, because that's the biggest thing I think we've all seen, especially during COVID, is that, we've lost consistency overall. Would you agree with something like that? Is there more or less, I don't know. I feel like we're not at that point of consistency again with travel, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just, I mean, to touch on the point that yeah, you can have your technology help guide you towards recognizing that loyalty or recognizing that repeat visitation.
Yeah.
You're right. In a perfect world, if you went back to a business for the second time, every single employee would welcome you back by name, and it would be,
Yeah.
the place where everyone knows your name, right? And it becomes a familiar, friendly environment. Well, if you're serving so many people, you need the support of technology to be able to send you those reminders. Hey, this person is loyal. They're a member of our loyalty program. They've got this status, right? We talk about memberships and annual passes in the attraction space. So here's that gentle nudge to welcome that person back. Thank them very much for their membership. Thank them for being a pass holder, whatever it is. And then the consistency comes with a lot of training. It comes with a lot of practice, and it comes with authenticity. It comes with the desire to want to serve the guest in that way. I look at so many things around me where I walk in and I remember the staff member and they're talking to me like I'm a first time person there. Or there are times where I don't remember the staff member and they welcome me back, and that's above average, right? That right there creates a memory that says, hey, they actually care about me, not as a customer, not as a transaction, but as a guest and as a valued individual. So yeah, that consistency comes with the training, it comes with the practice, and it comes with that authenticity and desire to serve that way.
So the big question is, though, how do you find the people that have that desire? Because I think it's so hard to find people that I think we get a lot of, I don't know from your experience in the past, but doing a lot of like staff interviews, like, hey, like the number one question I was asked when I got hired at Marriott was, how are you with people and how are you with tech? And if I'll tell you the answers was, one, I love people. Tech, I'll probably have to learn. It'll take me a little bit of a learning curve. I've never done a hotel before. That was my exact response. And my manager said, great, because if you said that opposite, where you said, I love technology, I'm really good with it, I can learn it like the back of my hand, but with people, I'm not the biggest fan. I get snappy. I don't like requests and dumb questions, all that type of stuff. He said I wouldn't have gotten the job, but the fact that you answer it differently, or that the reverse round, was a key indicator that I was a good fit. So, but how do attraction theme parks hire for people that actually, you don't get that guy that's just kind of behind the ticket saying like, all right, left lane, right lane. How do you hire for that? Because it's such a serving role, right? And I don't think a lot of people maybe say that they like to serve and get energy from it, but I think you could tell pretty quickly when they're in that type of position that they do or don't.
For sure. And the hiring for front of house and frontline employees in the attraction space, I would say, is very similar to hotels, because it's a lot of that same hospitality mindset and that desire to serve. I think a lot of it, and the tough part of it is, for a lot of people coming into the industry, it's their first job. So if you look at their resume, you look at their past experience, that's not necessarily going to tell the story. So it is about really pulling out what this person would do in certain circumstances, whether it is normal day-to-day circumstances or those that come up, those that are unusual, or those unusual day-to-day circumstances that you can kind of set your clock to. I think a lot of scenario-based questions. What would you do if a guest complained about a policy that you can't change? How would you explain that to the guest? Something like that. And then a lot of it can be reinforced in training and in onboarding and orientation of saying, this is our standard. This is now your opportunity. If you don't think that you can do this or that you would like to do this, we don't want to waste your time. We don't want you to waste our time. This is a good time here to kind of opt out and do it without any hard feelings whatsoever. So screening for those types of qualities can be challenging, but I think in the training and development of those employees, that there's a lot that can be accomplished and achieved from it.
I agree. I think also the big thing that we don't maybe talk about enough is that your employees are serving, so you need to serve them, so that way they're getting filled again. It's easy for people to take, and so when you're always being taken from, quote unquote, you're not like being taken from, but when you're always serving people, you do need that replenishment of like, whether it's training, but then realizing in the training, I think the biggest thing, and I'll call myself out on this when I was a manager, is that when I was doing training, I was trying to get through the material rather than recognizing that the material is very applicable to their certain skill set. We're not training to, not that I was like putting people down, but I was training to build out their efficiency or the places that they weren't super strong in. When rather I could have been going out of the different way and complimenting them on how they do take that extra second to pause and recognize the guest as a human rather than a check-in or check-out or a clean or a turnover or whatever it may be. So I think, giving back into your staff is a really important way to apply the training, because I feel like the more energized they get from that, the more that energy is going to carry through the transaction and the conversation experience they have with the guest. So always one thing that I like, if I could go back to my management days, that's one thing I would change a little bit. But what do you think from a managerial standpoint, I guess, or even a technology standpoint, do you feel like tech is really giving the training and the knowledge base to the overall end user enough to the point where they can use it properly in order to kind of hand off that admin work and really focus on the guest experience?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of advancements in user experience that allows the guest to have more control over their experience and their transaction, and that user experience needs to be intuitive for the staff as well. So when we're talking about training for standards and for guest service and for the hospitality measures of the operation, I think that's really where the meat and potatoes lie. So if you're spending a lot of time on training for technology, then the question is, well, why does the technology need so much focus on training versus, why isn't it as user friendly or as intuitive as perhaps it could be? So I think kind of looking at those hand in hand as far as how is the employee using the tech that's being handed to them? How is the guest using the tech that's being handed to them? Is it easy for the guest to figure out? Is it easy for the employee to be able to be onboarded onto it quickly and with the right amount of training, but without having to go through an excessive amount just to do their standard job function?
Josh, I love to ask kind of a final question to a lot of guests. And that goes into kind of two things. One, tell us a little bit more about your podcast, because I'm curious, just from overall podcaster point of view. But then two, if you could have one place for any listener to kind of check out more about what you're doing or more about just anything that you talked about today, where would you send them? So it's a two-parter.
Sure.
Tell us about your podcast and where would you send people from the show notes?
So I host the Guest Experience show for Roller. That can be found on the major podcast platforms. And so I focus a lot in the attractions industry, but also kind of everything in peripheral to it as well. So I've had people on from hotels, from airlines, from sports, and just all segments that focus on guest experience and really driving an experience. And as far as where you can find me, I know you said one place, but I'll give two, and it is LinkedIn and Twitter. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. It's Joshua_Liebman, Liebman.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to tag both of them in the show notes and make sure that everything is correct there. But Josh, I do want to say thank you so much for your patience on the little bit of a hiccup with our recording this morning, but then also just thank you for being on the show and thank you for putting out the content that you do and talking about the important stuff that we kind of covered today, because it's a breath of fresh air from a hospitality person to another. It's just I think we geek out about this stuff a lot, but it was always nice to dive in deep. So I appreciate you taking the time today.
This was a blast. Thanks for having me, Will.
Of course. All right, Slick Talkers, you heard it first here. Make sure you like and subscribe everything so that way you check out everything that Josh has talked about in the show, as well as his LinkedIn and Twitter. And we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.